Hi, my name is Jose Tomas Llanos. I'm at the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy at UCL. And this is a presentation on Submission 86, the role of consumer trust and policy tensions in the European Commission's data and AI strategy. I'm going to share my screen. All right. The European Commission recently released its plans to shape Europe's digital future, a data strategy and a white paper on AI. The main goal of this strategy is to increase the generation and availability of data for use and reuse in a bid to generate more data-driven innovation and the improvement and uptake of AI. This strategy is underpinned by the belief that the GDPR promotes consumer trust, which is necessary to lead to greater engagement with data-driven products and services, more data, and more data-driven innovation. There is also the idea that the GDPR can be used to enable novel data flows and foster competition. And generally, the protection of personal data and the promotion of data-driven competition are seen as compatible. These ideas they're nothing new. They have been around for some time. And Article 29 Working Party, EU commissioners, and EU Parliament MPs have expressed the same views. So in this presentation, we will assess the extent to which these assertions are sound or basically wishful thinking or rhetoric. So consider the following narrative. Survey after survey, the majority of participants said they're concerned about how companies use their personal data. If consumers realize that their personal data is compromised, mined, or subject to any other privacy violations, their trust is found to be diminished or perhaps lost. Without trust, some consumers are likely to refrain from engaging with data-driven technologies, opting instead for more traditional analog products. The GDPR was introduced to improve individuals' ability to control their personal data and provide them with efficient and operational means to ensure that fully informed about how their personal data is used. With this empowerment, individuals can now see for themselves where the data-driven products and services of their choice are consistent with their privacy preferences. As a consequence, their trust in and engagement with data-driven technologies is set to rise. This is a lovely narrative, but it is based on the assumption that individuals are digitally literate. Indeed, according to ENISA, digital trust depends to a great extent on users' knowledge of online privacy. Yet, the GDPR contains no mechanism whatsoever to improve user knowledge in this regard, and instead insists in the notice and consent model, which we all know it's broken. In this model, in practice, in online and data-driven settings, individuals must carefully read the notice, typically a privacy policy, of all of the service providers, so browser, websites, smartphone apps, IoT devices, in order to understand how their personal data is collected, used, assess any potential privacy risk, and on this basis provide or deny consent to the processing of their personal data. But the problem is this system discourages individuals from becoming aware of anything concerning data privacy. Privacy policies are typically long, vague, confusing, and just there's too much of them, they're everywhere. As a result, nobody reads, let alone understands them. And human-computer interaction research has shown that the notice consent requests are presented at the wrong time when we're trying to access a service or carry out our main activity. So we just click on agree or accept to get on with our lives. What's the outcome of this? Well, data subjects know nothing about the level of data privacy afforded by the services of their choice. Information asymmetries become entrenched, and data controllers know everything about what they do with the data, the value they extract from it, but we remain in the dark. In this setting, no trust can be gained and built. So from the outset, we can see that at least the first prong of the underpinning of the Commission strategy is just not true. Then let's see where the GDPR can enable data-driven competition. The ability of the GDPR to do so is very limited. We know that a number of tech giants, such as those depicted in this slide, have consolidated their dominance largely due to their ability to collect, process, and reuse vast amounts of personal data. So more data allows them to conduct more experiments and refine their algorithms, thus resulting in substantial product improvements. So they use the data they gather on one side of the market, since they're typically multi-sided platforms, and reuse it on a different side. They enjoy data-driven economies of scale, economies of scope, that ultimately derive in a positive feedback loop that increases their dominance and creates a quality gap between their services and those of competitors. They can use the data they process to leverage their market power onto related markets. They create certain dependency on the parts of consumers that, for example, have provided all their live data to specific platforms, and it's not easy to port it to competitors. And in this setting, a data advantage becomes an insurmountable barrier to entry. Competitors without access to the same scale and scope cannot refine their products, and then lose their ability and incentive to compete. So in this setting, it has the purpose limitation principle can in principle amount to a soft breakup of data monopolies, because by requiring that these platforms have a separate legal basis for each data processing operation conducted in furtherance of specific and clearly predefined purposes, the ability to use personal data for whatever purpose they want in whatever side of the market is bound to be reduced dramatically. So with this, without these data advantages, competitors could in principle be able to enter the markets more seamlessly. So it will reduce basically the barriers to entry that derive from data advantages. And in addition, the right to data portability by enabling consumers to port their data to competing services can reduce lock-in effects, enable multi-homing, and facilitate switching. So in this way, the GDPR can indeed promote competition to some extent. These, of course, are not tested ideas, and they can be highly disputed. They're highly disputable. But this is about it. And how come the GDPR cannot promote data-driven competition to a greater extent? It's because essentially the protection of personal data on the one hand and the promotion of data-driven innovation to the benefits of consumers in a way that promotes consumer welfare, one of the main goals of competition policy. Well, these are they pull in opposite directions. So by comparing these two different fields' main goals, we can see this tension. Let's start with data protection law. Data protection law is a product of European early discussions on privacy-related threats posed by information communication technologies. It aims to prevent harmful consequences on individuals' fundamental rights and freedoms, such as the right to privacy, self-determination, non-discrimination, autonomy, integrity, dignity, and reputation that might ensue from the misuse of personal data. So this regulatory framework provides for an array of principles, requirements, and rights that prevents so-called unnecessary data processing in order to avoid that individuals are unduly singled out. So it essentially places restriction on the collection and use and reuse of personal data. In doing so, it lies in tension with the dynamics of big data and data-driven innovation. So let's see, for example, in the purpose limitation principle. Big data entails a combination of large volumes of data collected from diverse contexts to extract hidden and unpredictable inferences and correlations, which are typically unknown at the time of data collection. The purpose limitation principle, conversely, was designed to set the boundaries within which personal data collected for a specific purpose might be subsequently used, thereby inhibiting mission creep. That could happen if personal data is used beyond the purposes for which it is initially collected. Okay, so we see a very clear incompatibility here. Then think in the data minimization principle. Since more data enhances the likelihood of more valuable insights being found, all data is collected, not the one necessary for a specific purpose, but also data of mere potential utility or data of seemingly no value. This practice, of course, it sits at all with the data minimization principle, which requires that only what is strictly necessary in relation to specific purposes that legitimize the data processing be collected and processed. You can find additional tensions between big data-driven innovation, and the GDPR, for example, in provisions regarding the requirements of consent, data accuracy, storage limitation, the protection of special categories of data, automated decision making, and data protection by design. So we see here there's a clash with big data. Competition law, on the other hand, seeks to protect the process of competition in the internal market. This protection is the scope of this protection is far from settled, but it suffices to say here that consumer welfare, the promotion of consumer welfare, is arguably in more competition policy the main goal in which the main way in which the competition is protected. Consumer welfare, being a term borrowed from economics, in competition policy has some sort of specific meaning, referring to the benefits consumers derive from the competitive process in the form of low prices, better quality, more choice, and more data-driven, more greater innovation. These benefits, of course, have different weight depending on the market at hand. In commodity markets, it's price the most important consideration, but in high-tech setting, it's typically innovation considerations, the ones that receive the most attention. So competition rules seek to keep markets open so consumers can indeed enjoy the benefits that enjoy from the process competition in the relevant markets. In data-driven sectors, this includes the benefits derived from data-driven competition. Thanks to the dynamics of big data and the data-driven competition, groundbreaking products have been launched into a marketplace, such as applications that improve students' learning assessment, medical monitoring technology that improve patient outcomes, solutions that provide data-driven intelligence and insight for small businesses. It has also been pivotal for the development and improvement of search engines, social media, e-commerce, and online advertising, also enabling the smart grid and efficiencies in traffic management, retail, logistics, and fraud detection. So consumers have indeed reap the benefits from this innovation, especially when the product these innovations take the form of zero-price products that is exchanged for personal data, as low prices are traditionally seen as a boon to consumers. Therefore, if there is any issue of data foreclosure, competition law will logically seek to remove these problems in order to enable more data access, more circulation, and more innovation to the benefit of consumers. We can see that competition law is in line with big data. The tension here is apparent. And this tension manifests itself in different scenarios that lead to normatively inconsistent outcomes. I'm going to focus in two here. Article 102 and refusal to supply in data-driven sectors. Article 102 can be relied upon to restore competition by removing bottlenecks for data access by incumbent competitors, provided, of course, that incumbent holds a dominant position in the relevant market, and the refusal to give access to data constitutes an abuse of dominant position. Okay. The idea is that by giving access to competitors to the relevant data, competitors will be able to innovate and improve their services, compete on the merits, and reduce the extent of the incumbent data advantage. This has happened already. Well, in these cases, a data sharing obligation is imposed on the dominant undertaking. So in 2014, the French Competition Authority ordered GDF Suez, a gas and electricity supplier, to grant competitors access to part of its database of clients, which would ensure that competing gas suppliers could compete more effectively with GDF by enabling them to better inform customers of alternative offers available to them. With regard to certain customers, GDF Suez had to provide its competitors customer personal data, including names, home address, fixed telephone numbers, and consumption profiles, clearly personal data. So the French Competition Authority implemented this data sharing obligation with an opt-out mechanism, meaning that consumers have to prevent competitors from accessing their data. This is a problematic solution from a data protection standpoint, because an opt-out mechanism doesn't lead to valid consent on the GDPR. It might have been the case before under the Data Protection Directive, but not anymore. And arguably, user consent here would have been the most appropriate legal basis to enable this new processing of personal data. At any rate, the data quality requirements of Article 5 the GDPR had to be met, including the purpose limitation principle, which would have required that consumers be informed that the data was being shared with third parties and therefore processed for a different purpose, but this wasn't the case. So here we have a problematic, normatively inconsistent outcome. There is the promotion of competition on the one hand, but poor protection of individuals with regards to protection of personal data. The same can be seen in merger review or assessment of agreement under Article 101, when data-driven efficiencies are put forward. So in merger review, when a proposed concentration is assessed to determine whether it will significantly impede effective competition, the merging parties can claim and prove that efficiencies stemming from the transaction are will outweigh any likely anti-competitive effects. But what happens when these efficiencies arrive from the combination of the merging parties' data set that include personal data? We have the same outcome. You promote competition on the one hand, but impinging upon individuals' data protection. These efficiency defenses have been put forward, and it was actually successful in Microsoft Yahoo, an approved concentration, TomTom Teleatlas, and assessment and agreements in ASNet Equifax. The same problem. Same poor protection of individuals. So the situation looks very grim so far, and one could wonder maybe if the data protection regulatory framework still strikes a right balance between the protection of data privacy and the promotion of data-driven innovation. So what happens with the protection of individuals? As we saw before, this protection takes the form of preventing an unnecessary data collection and processing in order to prevent undue identification of individuals. But in our current digital economy, this is like trying to fix an arm with a plaster. It's just completely ineffective. In the era of ubiquitous connectivity, big data, cloud computing, IoT, data is being generated and collected at unprecedented levels, and controllers' incentives put in opposite direction of the spirit of data protection law. They want more data to derive more value. In this setting, data protection authorities are underfunded and underfunded and understaffed. So the instances where they detect unlawful processing and collections are the exception rather than the norm. This situation is not likely to be improved. Now, with regards to the focus on identifiability, well, data protection law is also failing because given the state of the art of the current data processing technologies, irreversible anonymization is impossible. There are many instances, cases reported in the media with allegedly anonymous data sets where it eventually led to the identifications of individuals that were the person whose personal data was included in the data sets. And crucially, data protection law is ill-equipped to protect individuals against the harms derived from inferential analytics. On the basis of correlations that arise from big data processing, inferences about individuals and groups of individuals' behaviors, preferences, and private lives are made. And these inferences are typically used to nudge and manipulate us, or worse still, to discriminate against us. So in order to change your moods, to change your consumption habits, or maybe we are denied a loan on the basis of correlations we just don't understand. This is hugely problematic from a data protection standpoint, giving rise to data harms that the GDPR cannot solve. This is because data subjects' right to know about, rectify, delete, object, and port personal data are considerably attenuated in respect of inferences, which typically require a greater balance with the controller's interests, such as trade secrets and intellectual property, than otherwise would be the case. So inferences, derived and inferred data are some sort of economy class personal data under the data protection law. So we're not doing great in terms of individuals' protection. And then what about the promotion of innovation? Insofar as data protection laws place restriction on the collection, use, and reuse of data, the degree to which they are restrictive or permissive is likely to have an impact on data-driven innovative outcomes. An assessment and comparison amongst the data protection regulatory regimes of the US and China suggests that the GDPR is not doing any favors to the competitive performance of EU firms. According to Castro et al., after carrying out a thorough assessment of these two regulatory frameworks, the EU's GDPR is the most restrictive of the three, okay? They concluded that the EU regulatory environment creates the most restriction on the collection and use of data, followed by the United States and China. So this is no surprise, but what happens when we compare the rate of innovation of these three different jurisdictions? We know that the US had championed the digital economy, giving birth to Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and many more. And at the same time, China recently has seen the emergence of very large platforms that have an established international presence, such as Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And what about the EU? We remain unable to produce any undertaking with international presence. And of course, I mean, correlation doesn't mean causation, and the US and China success in data-driven innovation and the ability to produce tech giants might be due to other factors, such as government intervention or startup culture. But this very fact, this anecdotal evidence suggests that the GDPR is not very conducive to improving the competitiveness of EU firms. And crucially, the GDPR was passed to some extent in order to reduce administrative burden, but in the end, strict requirements on transparency, information disclosure, and accountability involve substantial red tape, and also compliance with the data quality principles required a rearrangement of data processing capabilities. In the end, this leads to high compliance costs that are harmful for startups and SMEs, as German data protection authorities contended in 2019. What happens then? This is highly expensive. An average firm of 500 employees is estimated to spend around $3 million in order to be GDPR compliant. It's very high compliance cost. So ultimately, incumbents are favored because they have the financial strength to bear this cost, to the detriment of EU newcomers, which just cannot bear the same. The GDPR becomes therefore a regulatory barrier to entry, and established incumbents, established platforms see their dominant position reinforced. Actually, Google and Facebook become more powerful in the online advertising markets after the entry into force of the GDPR. So we have poor data protection, less innovation in the EU, and heightened barriers to entry for EU entrants. This is a problematic outcome that should make us think what can be done in this regard. It's time to think of new mechanisms that lead to normatively consistent outcomes and allow to protect individuals on one hand and promote the competitiveness of the EU at the same time. Thank you.